Hey everyone, welcome to Assorted Goods. I'm Dan Felton. Thank you for joining me today as we take a curious look at the world around us. I hope you're doing well out there. This episode, I'm sitting down to have a conversation with one of my favorite members of the independent podcast community, Michael Motley Jr. Mike is one of the members of the Cut podcast and is the host and creator of the OneMic Black History Podcast. We're talking about what it's like to make content based on telling the stories of Black American history, the challenges of getting people to listen to the good and bad of these stories, and of course, a little about podcasting, and really so much more as well. So sit back, get comfortable, get ready to hear someone other than me talk a bunch. It's a nice change of pace, and enjoy.
Assorted Goods is produced by Disinformed Media in association with Verboten Productions. Promotional support comes from the Always Up Network and DeanBlundell.com.
He's a fellow podcaster, a connoisseur of history, a must follow on Twitter and Instagram, and overall someone I've been lucky enough to get to know through this whole podcasting endeavor from the Cut podcast and the OneMic Black History Podcast. It's the one mic of OneMic, Michael Motley Jr. Thank you for joining me here on Assorted Goods. It feels like it's long overdue.
Yeah, man, and it has been long overdue. This is dope. This is super awesome. I've been, wanting to do this for a while, and I actually love doing podcasting interviews because it's the one time where people ask you a bunch of questions and they get to talk because I'm a chatty patty, and I get to. I never had a bad one. We shoot the shit. We have a good time. We laugh. We joke around. You talk about history. You ask me questions. It's always a good time. You meet people and you feel like, even though without podcasting, I probably would have never met you. Yeah. But we feel like we've known each other for forever, and that's dope.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. And, I have to say right off the start of the show, I had to bring you on Assorted Goods because you went on another great podcast, Damon Does Six Questions. I've been a guest there too, where you did an interview and you said a lot a lot about me on that one. I couldn't believe I was being talked about so much, but you said some kind words and you are right. I am very weird. So I had to bring you on to actually like reciprocate the appreciation of all that. I have to say though, as we get started though, OneMic is in my opinion like one of the most premier indie podcasts out there right now. You've been killing it. Almost 2 years now. Am I right?
Yeah, it's been about 2 years, and it's man. As a one-man band, it's really tough. So it's kind of funny. The other day, Google opened up their podcast investor thing. They give you like $15,000 and they send you through this like podcasting boot camp. It's a lot. It's a heavy investment because it takes like 20 weeks. You got to be there. Somebody had to be there for some of them. I tried to sign up. I don't know if I can even invest the time, but I shot my shot. Anyway, they're like, hey, let's meet your team. I'm like, team? Team, it's just me, champ. That's it. Yeah. There's no one else but me. He's like, we can't accommodate more than 5 people. Well, you ain't got to worry about that.
You should ask him. You should be like, I know people who could fill the spots if you want them to come along.
Right. Who's your producer?
Right. Yeah. That's a common thread is I always feel that way too doing this show. I'm like, at the end, the credits are all the people, all the sources that I used to write this, and like my brother who made a little music for it. Like, right. That's it. That's the team, man. But you've been making OneMic for about 2 years. And again, you've been your YouTube channels, you're doing great. Your social media content, the way you sort of, you've got it figured out, I think is what I say. You're closer to figuring it out, I think, than most people in the podcast world. So I just got to ask, right now, how are you feeling? Almost 2 years in with your own sort of production. What's the status report?
I feel great. I feel, there's one thing, the weird thing about podcasting, that's a way of humbling you because you feel like you're figuring out and you're doing everything correctly. I'm going on press tours and talking about history and I'm like, yeah, this is working. My downloads on, in the podcasting space, which is always tough. I do about 200, 250 an episode, which is like insane. You like, if you remember the cut, when I was doing the cut, I was 50. 50. Yeah. So doing 250 an episode is is monumental stuff. YouTube does maybe, man, YouTube's exponential. I have episodes that have 20,000 views. So it's insane. But on the flip side of that, like, it really has a way of humbling you. I remember I applied for Black Podcasting Awards, and I was like, they have a history category. I mean, how many Black history podcasts did you know? There's no way I could lose. Oh, did I not? Not only did I lose, I didn't even get nominated. I was like, how? I remember I lost out to Black fashion history. I'm sure it's amazing. Wow. Like, talk about, like, go sit in the corner, Mike. You thought you were going to make it, and it is tougher out here than you thought. So yeah, I struggle with that. Also, I applied for podcast, and I was like, I got to get this right. I got to. Nah, you're not getting any money. And then this is bringing it around in a total circle. So they doing like 11 days of podcast where they like, hey, these guys won. And yesterday I saw, is that Black fashion history again? What is happening? I lost you again.
And I think for listeners who are non-podcasting listeners should know that like 250 an episode is like high percentages. Like that's like way beyond the threshold. Like 99% of people who do podcasts are in the double digits.
90. Yeah. I mean, everybody, no one's going to be Joe Rogan. And the idea that you could even get to a space where, like, you need help. You would need someone to push you along, or to start like really advertising your podcast, or paying money, or having like a bankroll. And when you're doing it based off of word of mouth and Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, I read an article from one of the, a podcast industry person the other day who said, you can make like $300,000 a year doing a podcast. All you need is a $50,000 advertising budget. And I was like, oh, sure. I'll just go to the bank and put that out in front of them and say, hey, look, we got a long-term plan.
Is that the only thing I need?
Yeah, is that it? Is that all?
Is that
microphone and $50,000. That's all it takes. So, I mean, since you first started with specifically with the OneMic History Show, what have you learned? What have you gotten better at in that time? What do you feel like you've improved on?
One of the things I struggled with at the very beginning, and I still kind of struggle with it, is while I have a script, I don't want it to sound like a script. If you ever will listen to Dan Carlin, I'm sure Dan Carlin has a fucking script. But if you ever listen to his episodes, they are amazing. And it sounds so conversational. Like you could be just sitting in the room with him and he would just rattle off about the Civil War or, freaking Peloponnesian War for 3 hours. And this is what I realized I was never gonna be fucking Dan Carlin. That's like asking some guy why you don't play like LeBron James. Right. Okay, I'm not going to be him, but I could be the best Mike. And so I've been putting an effort to try to sound less like I'm doing a book report and more enthusiastic about the content that I was giving you. So if I can at least be me with more energy. So this season, it's been an effort to like really give you energy in things that most likely, if you would listen to it, you're like, why would I give a shit about Plessy versus Ferguson? Well, I'm going to give you this with energy and show you why I'm passionate about it. So in hopes that maybe you will be passionate about it. So yeah, that's been my journey, is to just sound less like I'm reading from a book report and more like more conversational and just more interesting in general.
And for listeners of this show, of Assorted Goods, I'm sure people who have been around for a long time and people who are listening now will know that is dead on exactly the same kind of stuff that I've dealt with when I first started. That's the critique I always got from people when I'd ask, what do you think of the show? You sound a little bit like you're reading. And it's like, it's because I wrote 5,000 words for this episode and I got to read them to you. Like, it's a challenge.
What I found is that reading the script over and over again and knowing where those words need to be emphasized, or adding that into your script. Like, okay, this I'm going to start ramping up, maybe do some exclamation points or just putting that in your script or writing the script like you would talk. So you go over it and at first it's like a rough draft and it sounds fine, but you're like, I wouldn't say that. I would say this. Yeah. And if you start adding your own vernacular to it, and then with that emphasis, it sounds less like you're reading. But also I found, because I've been doing it a while, that you start to get in your bag. Like, hey, I'm reading this, I'm in my bag, and this is flowing, this is working, and I sound enthusiastic. And then you mess up, you're like, God damn it.
And I feel like improvising too, like I know when I run through my scripts and all that, I do that. I try to edit them 2 or 3 times to sort of like hammer down every word that I go through. And then I find the more that I'm doing this and the more that I kind of relax, the more I find my brain's able to like come up with a lot. I'll be reading a script. I've already been through this 3 times. And then I get to a part and my brain's like, here's a joke you could make right now. And I'm like, all right, try it. Right. Like, and half the time it's a flub and I got to go back and get that and start again. But like, yeah, there's an art form to that. We don't get educated. We don't go to school to learn how to properly read as a podcaster. So, I mean, yeah, you definitely have to find your own sort of angle to reading through the information you bring.
Yeah, it's tough. And I feel as though you can learn some things from listening to professional podcasters and see how they do things, or professional YouTubers. I learned, I keep bringing up Mr. Baller mostly because I like his channel. I'm into it. I watch all his videos, but he's an amazing storyteller. And while my stories aren't in the same vein, it's not creepypasta, I'm not going to be able to keep people engaged the same way he does. There are some things that I can pull away from your ability to keep people engaged and tell stories. And this is, once again, one of the things I want to do is to, hey, borrow things. Okay, I can do that. I can't, mimic your entire style, but I can take little bits away from it and then, mold myself into an amalgamation of multiple different people.
Yeah. I think that's probably, I know some people creatively who are like, oh, I don't like to draw on other people's creations, and that's fine. I think everybody learns their own way, but I agree with you. A lot of what I think I am creatively has been exactly that. Like I got to look at other people to be like, well, what do you do well? Like, and not everything's a fit, right? Like not everything is, right. Somebody might do one thing well and it's like, that just it's not going to work for me. But, there are bits and pieces. I think we're all always a mashup of our creative influences when we decide to be creative as well.
Absolutely.
And, I'm glad you touched on that, because I wanted to say, one of the things I feel like your show and your content and your podcast and your YouTube and all that stuff, like over the last year especially, has turned a little bit for me into like, you're kind of like the guy who's sitting next to me in class and I want to cheat off your paper a little bit. Because every now and then I'll like, you post a YouTube link and I'll like I'll watch it and I'm like, oh, what's he doing over here? Like, oh, that's all the thumbnails on his YouTube channel. And like, oh, okay. Like I feel like I learned from you. So I think I'm curious is over the past couple of years when you've been doing OneMic, like what are some of the resources you've been have you been consulting? You taken seminars, or you've got a lot of good pieces down in sort of the content game. So I'm wondering what some of your, influences and resources are that you've drawn from.
One of the things, well, I was always in IT spaces, what I do for a living. So I kind of understand it a little bit. I don't want to act like I'm some freaking algorithm guru or something, but when I was doing the cut, it was the YouTube channel was doing poorly, and I didn't understand why. And then I started trying to reevaluate not just the cut, but what I'm doing as a whole, and try to see if I could find the value in this, or bring value to my listeners. Like, what am I doing, and why would anyone want to watch this? Why would you stop doing what you're doing to watch this? And once you start like, okay, I have a value proposition for my listeners. Now, how do I make them watch? How do I get you to where if you were to watch it, you'll like it? But now you don't know you like it. You don't know you want to listen to it. And this is where the research comes in, where I'm like, okay, well, how can I get people to watch? How can I make better thumbnails? How can I get a better hook that's where they won't just run away as soon as they listen to it. So if you watch the videos, you'll see that my intros have gotten super short, and I just have like a really quick hook, and then I go through my whole spiel on why you should, all of my socials, and then I get started. Like and I've got to the point where that spiel in the middle about where you can find me and how you can support the channel, it's like, I'm getting it in. Let's go. You already know you want to watch this. You've seen all this stuff. I'm not going to lollygag. I'm going to get this in under a minute, and then I'm going to start telling you about this story as quickly as possible, because I don't want to lose you. And especially with YouTube, those cats have an attention span of a doorknob, absolute doorknob, and they're not podcasters and YouTubers. They in two different spaces. So my long form content that people on podcasting space love, like, oh, I listened to your whole episode, and then you make the same episode for YouTube, and they listen to like 4 minutes of it. I was like, we're just getting good. Like that was still that.
I'm feeling like incredible anxiety right now, because this episode probably started with a 90 second to 2 minute intro and all that. And I hope you're still here listening, because there's a good interview going on. So,
well, see, once again, podcasting space is not like that. Those people are willing. And I have heard some people complain about people who have extra long intros, but they're way more willing to give you leeway than they are in the YouTube space. So a lot of the decisions that I made with my podcast have been with YouTube in mind, because I felt as though the things that were good for YouTube were also my podcasting listeners were like, I'm still making long form content, even though I've made my episodes shorter and have been trying to keep them under 30 minutes. But like short intros, getting straight to the point, going straight into the story, not lollygagging. Even my outros are super quick. All those things that work in the YouTube space and people who are successful in the YouTube space do. Like, why can't I do this in podcasting? So this is I'm kind of drawing from those influences and saying, hey, maybe I can do this in the podcasting space, and people will appreciate it. I don't know. No one's ever said that, but I think it helps.
You've applied the things that you're learning from one to the other. Like there's no, it's the common thread I always get into with people when we talk about podcasts. There's no right way to do this. This is just up to whoever wants to create it. You take principles from one thing, you apply it to the other, and it works or it doesn't work, or shit, who knows, right? But I'm going to have to start going to your seminars, I think.
It's been a wild journey, because even at work, like I've done speeches at work, 3 speeches at work about Black history, about Juneteenth, about Black History Month.
Yeah.
And it's really weird that people look at you and they're like, Mike's a history buff or history expert. And I'm like, nah, I'm just a dude who reads a couple books, tells a 20-minute story. Like this is not my dissertation on Black history. This is mostly like I'm trying to make quick, easily digestible history for people, so that they can learn something that otherwise they wouldn't have any idea, or they could give a shit. Like, hey, why would I listen to this? Why is this important? Why is Ida B. Wells important? Well, let me show you in 20 minutes or less.
Right. So I have to ask, what made you want to start a podcast focused on Black history specifically?
Yeah, I mean, you know this story. You know, I was listening to
I swear I'm not trying to set that up. So
no, seriously. I listened to your episode about Tulsa, and I was like, this is dope. I want to do this. And I especially remember listening to, thinking about like your sound design and the music, and how the music was, period appropriate, and how you had the sound design with the sound effects, and it took you to a place like you felt like you were living through it. You were there. And I was like, I want to do this, but I have no idea how to get there. And even still, it's something that I struggle with. I remember listening to Black History Buff, and I talked about this when I did the interview with Ariel with the podcast recommendations.
Right.
And I talked about Black History Buff and how he did the Little Rock Nine, and it was like you was right there, like you were there. I was there in Little Rock as they were trying to go into the school in 1957, and I was like, nothing I do is like this.
Yeah.
like I'm telling a book report, you're listening to it as just an information, but you're never transported to this time period where you feel like you're in the middle of it. Like you feel what she's felt. You feel empathy for what she's going through. You can hear the people screaming at her.
Yeah.
He even had a freaking interview with one of the Little Rock Nine. And I'm like, how? Now, granted, that wasn't his interview. She wasn't talking to him. It was from another news outlet, but still, it's like, how do you get here? So yeah, I still have a lot to learn. And one of the big issues, especially with that sound design, it's expensive. It's expensive.
Yeah. Time consuming too, right? Like,
it's time consuming. It's one of the things that I'm kind of on the fence about. Like, you know what? I'm going to sit on this. And then when I get big, I'm going to pay someone else to do it. We'll put that in pay someone else to do a bank for later on.
I'll submit my resume right away. But did you have a sort of general interest in history throughout your life? Is it a subject that you've gotten into, or has this podcast sort of been your gateway to learning about history stories?
It was interesting because I had a passing interest in history. I was always, pretty good at history. When I was in school, it's the sort of things that stuck. When you were a kid and you've been an underachiever, you're almost your entire life, or you have this mindset where if you're not 100% invested in something, this is just me.
Right.
If I'm not 100% invested in something, then I am 0% invested in it. I'm either all in or I could care less.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I was an underachiever. So finding something like history that I really enjoy and that, oh, this is great. I'm 100% in on this. My mind is like, you like this. It was easy. It was easy for me. I remember, where were we? It feels like it was a wedding, but I don't think it was a wedding. I might have been a birthday party. I was at a birthday party with members of the Cut, and I was like, yo, I had this idea for this Black History podcast, and we kind of shot the idea around. They kind of shot the idea around, and how they could help. But in my mind, I was like, nah, this is all me, champ. This is all me, champ. I had already had, it kind of feels like, you're a New Edition and you're Bobby Brown and you're going solo, or you're in a band and now you having to split this check 5 ways, and you're like, you know what? I got a better idea. I'm going to do solo. Not that I cut them out, but I don't like to depend on people because I don't trust them to do what needs to be done. I know I can trust me. I know I'm going to do it. If I trust you and you don't get it done, then we all look stupid. I don't want this group project. I want to depend on me, and I know I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what needs to be done. This is how you end up into this space because I could depend on myself.
Yeah, you can meet your own deadlines, right? So.
Yeah, I can meet my own deadlines. I don't mind. I was up to 2:00 in the morning last night working on TikTok content.
Wow. I appreciate you getting up for this then.
It's not so bad. My son got up at like 7 in the morning. He was up at 7. My wife went to class. So I was going to be up regardless.
Good. Now, I think the main reason I wanted to have you on the show and get into this finally is just sort of the general concept of your show as a whole. Your angle, and I've heard you talk about it before, is that you notice, and I think anybody can notice, that there are massive holes in our teachings of history. And specifically, unsurprisingly, there are massive holes in the way we teach the history of any people who don't look like me, and your podcast you're right. You make digestible content. You make sort of short, long hybrid sort of episodes and all that. You get really into these topics and you do a great job of explaining them concisely and quickly. And so bringing you on here I wanted to get a little bit into the sort of the nitty gritty of it. Now that you've been doing this for almost 2 years, Do you have a bit more of an insight into, what everybody needs, what the education system needs to do better teaching people about the full story of history, specifically in America, Black history, which has been completely glossed over for a long time. What do you think needs to be done better through your experience now?
Wow. One of the issues, and even I have this issue. I had this issue when I was in school, is that we teach Black history as a linear path, as if we went from, the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction, some bad shit happened, but we were getting better. We were getting better till Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. Hey, it's over. Wipe your hands.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, you're done. Get everybody, pack your shit. Let's get on out of here. And what really needs to be taught is that it's ebbs and flows. And God, and it's even tough for me. When I'm doing, the talks for work, and they're like, hey, Mike, we want you to come in. I'm like, I need to give you content that you're not going to be disgusted by.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to give you, like, if I tell you about Emmett Till, you're going to be like, yo, what the fuck?
It's going to be a weird mood in the office for the rest of the day.
It's going to be a weird mood in the office all day. And that's the difficult part with Black history, is that it's, for the most part, it's very overwhelmingly negative. A lot of things is mostly almost total subjugation. And Reconstruction on, past Civil Rights Act, it was still things happening. It was horrible almost the entire time. Like, there are some good moments, the Jack Johnsons, but for the most part, it's almost all bad. And I think that's the part that a lot of people struggle with, is that how do we teach people something and they can learn about something that's overwhelmingly negative, right, overwhelmingly against one group of people, perpetrated by another group of people. And that group of people is still in power. Like, right, why would I ever loosen that grip? Why would I ever let you learn or, entertain this idea of showing you how bad my ancestors were? You can't come to grips with your own history. Because Black history is American history. It's not as if these things are separate. These things happen. These things do not happen in a vacuum. It's your history. It's the history of America. It's very much intertwined. When Du Bois, in the crisis, when World War II was happening, he told Black people to put away their special grievances and stand shoulder to shoulder with their brethren and fight for democracy. You know what I'm saying? This stuff is directly intertwined with American history. And I feel like the way you can get a little bit over the bad taste is by not portraying it as much like Black history, but portraying it as in, this is history of all of us. And that's, I think that's more easily digestible, even though I am still going to be pushing Black history content, because I feel like there are stories to be told. And in the future, I would like to be a little more positive. Like, I would like to start doing maybe, musical artists or movie actors and actresses. And hey, maybe even bad guys at some point. I wouldn't mind the idea of doing, Black Mafia family, or the history of the Bloods and the Crips, or even Nicky Barnes. Because everybody. This is the thing. This is a thing that Obama said in 2016. He was like, Black history is not a series of highlights. This is not sports.
Yeah.
It's the highs and the lows. It's the famous and the obscure. So every story I tell you can't be Martin Luther King. It can't be Malcolm X. It can't be Ida B. Wells. It has to be everything all amalgamated together. So if I tell you about, Plessy versus Ferguson, at some point I'm gonna have to tell you about, okay, well, this guy wasn't a good person. This guy wasn't a good person. Or like how these things intertwine with each other and how they all mesh together to tell a whole picture.
We're going to take a quick break and hear from a new podcast called Goodniks that's launching soon, all about the good people looking to do good in the world. So have a listen and subscribe to that as well. On the other side of the break, more with Michael Motley as we talk about the challenges of telling the good and bad sides of historical heroes, the opposition to teaching the full story of history at all, and of course a whole lot more. Assorted Goods will be right back.
Like, I can't, there are problems I cannot solve. And that doesn't mean that I'm afraid of tilting at windmills, because my goodness, show me a windmill and I'll tilt at that. But we look for the problems we can solve.
We all want to do good in the world. Nearly all of us, at one time or another, imagined ourselves doing something noble or heroic. But most of us get derailed by life, by our careers, by our families. I'm Annalisa Enrile, and you're listening to the trailer for the new audio project called Goodniks. On Goodniks, we're interested in the people among us who take and stay on the good path, and in what their experiences might mean for the rest of us. I interview 10 people with very different journeys about how they ended up doing good in the world.
I was in 4th grade, and we used to come back up from the basement from gym to where our main classrooms were. And I was in line like everybody else, waiting to get a drink from the water fountain. And I'm in line, I get my chance, I'm at the water fountain, and I take a drink, and the kid behind me says, "Hurry up." And I looked at him and I said, "I just got here, I'll be done in a minute." And the words that came out of his mouth were, "You blacks are all alike." And I just could not, for the life of me, understand where that came from. But that was my first literal fight, because I punched him in his face. And I think the first time I realized that I was actually in the middle of a war.
Goodniks is an audio project exploring the journey and meaning of doing good in the world. For those of us who do good, and for those of us who are just thinking about it. We follow the journey of 10 Goodniks who do good in very different ways, to understand why they do it and what it means to do good over a life, in a moment, and for a season. I'm your host, Annalisa Enrile, a social worker, a professor, and a human rights activist. In a world and at a time that seems obsessed with what's wrong, we at Goodniks want to obsess about what's right.
If you are a good person, if you in your brain and in your heart and in your soul, if you as a person are a good person, being a cop has nothing to do with it. Being a cop is just your job. And it's just a uniform that you put on top of it, and that you're able to channel your good person into. And if you're not a good person, you're not a good cop.
We will drop a 20-minute episode of Goodniks each week over 10 weeks. Each episode exploring a critical moment along the path to doing good in the world. Each week, you'll hear from people with different experiences, backgrounds, childhoods, and perspectives on what it means to do good.
Wow, what would I have said to my younger self about choosing to devote your life to movement building? I think I would have tried to talk myself out of it, probably by saying it's really heartbreaking work, that there is a lot of loss and a lot of defeat along the way. The victories are pretty damn sweet, but the truth is that change is really, really slow.
We at Goodniks believe this is an important conversation to have now. We hope you agree and will join us. Be sure and click the subscribe button so you don't miss the first episode. You can do that anywhere you listen to podcasts. For more information about this project and who our Goodniks are, visit us at goodniks.org. GOODNIKS.org. You can also follow @TheGoodniks on Twitter.
It's really hard, and you can do everything right, and you can be so smart, and you can still suffer kind of crushing losses over and over again. So you've got to have a pretty thick skin, a pretty tough heart to be able to go through that over and over again and still want to get up the next morning and go at it again.
And now, more with Michael Motley Jr. I think it's funny. I mean, you're talking about that, right? That you got to sometimes tell the stories of the good guys and bad guys. And you're making me think, like, why is Al Capone like a romanticized character of American history, and Tookie Williams is like the man who ruined America? It's like the good guys of American history are painted as saints, and the bad guys are painted as like sort of charming rebels, you know, and you know, people dress up like Al Capone for Halloween, but no one's dressing up like a Crip and going to the bar on Halloween because you know, you wouldn't even be allowed into the bar because that would be dress code violations in a lot of places. Yes, but what do you think? You know, I think you touched on it a little bit there, but you know, why do you think people are so opposed? We talked a little on Twitter a few weeks ago when Ketanji Brown Jackson's being nominated for the Supreme Court, right? One of the methods or the tactics employed to try to oppose her nomination was using critical race theory again, because it's been weaponized as a term. And the people who use it say overtly, we don't want to teach anything about race. Do you think there's an intertwining of what you just said, the fact that to teach Black history is to teach the violence and to teach the oppression and teach all that? And because it implies that one group, white people, did it to another group, non-white people of any kind, is that a barrier that you think has to be crossed? How do you combat this sort of cultural movement that to teach any authentic history is to be teaching CRT and to be indoctrinating children and all this bullshit that they put out?
It's the mindset. Their mindset is so ridiculous. The idea that you're creating divisiveness just by teaching CRT or by teaching Black history. Because what happens with CRT is it starts bleeding. It starts bleeding into anything. Next thing you know, you're not teaching about Martin Luther King because that's CRT. Everything and anything can be CRT, and also none of it, because no one really knows what the fuck it means. They don't really know what it means. So it's a scary thing, because I feel like the people who are against it are so entrenched into the idea of being against CRT that there's nothing that I could say to them that will convince them otherwise. I do feel like CRT has a huge branding issue. And I mean, even before it became a buzzword, I felt like it had a branding issue, because critical race theory was so vague. The idea, the term is so vague. It doesn't really convey what we're attempting to do here, what she's attempting to do here. And God, I can't remember her name for shit. But the idea here is that basically it's just the teaching of how this, you know, United States was built on the backs of slaves. That's it. The economy, everything that you built was built on slavery. And since that time, you've been trying to continue that idea without actually physically enslaving someone. So convict leasing, sharecropping, now low wages, keeping you in this low socioeconomic status. And that starts to extend outside of race. But it's a lot of Black people in that treadmill, you know, and it's all the CRT is, you know. But when you start, the idea here is that teaching your kids about this is creating divisiveness, never takes into account the Black kids that have lived with this their entire lives. It only accounts for the white kids that you feel like you're being divisive with. And if that's the case, it still perpetuates that stereotype that your kids are somehow better, more special, more worthy, deserving of special treatment than Black kids who have dealt with this type of racism their entire lives, or that lack of privilege, you know. And I know people are selfish. I know people only care about their kids. I get it. You know, I only like one kid. I like mine. And everybody else's kid, I'm kind of like, get away from me. Well, I mean, I get it. I completely get it. But you run away from your history, you trying to put your spin on history, or trick your fingers in your ears about history, or banning books, the anti-racism baby, or whatever Ted Cruz dumbass is talking about today. does not make things better. We live in an information age. You cannot block information from people. People are going to find it, and they're going to find it readily available in a world full of information. You can't stop people from learning about it. What you need to do is embrace that history, embrace your legacy, embrace the truth.
Yeah.
This is what I would tell you to do, but I know they're not going to listen. They don't care.
and the weaponization of the term, the fact that there are, I think I maybe mentioned to you when we were talking about this on Twitter, that there is actually a guy, I won't name him here because I don't think he's worth naming in this episode, but there is a guy in America whose overt goal he has stated out loud was, my job was to redefine CRT, critical race theory, as anything that is ideologically not aligned with sort of right-wing Republican politics, that anything that doesn't fall into our purview of being acceptable, we just slap CRT on it. It'll create a massive negative response from people, and that's the goal, is to make it an umbrella term that can be used for anything at all. And it's very odd to me. How can you give the game away and then people just keep playing it?
You know what the crazy thing about CRT is? CRT is not taught in schools. It's college elective. It's a college elective. Yeah. Do you know how many people I've seen come to school board meetings? People who don't even have kids. You don't even have kids in this school district, but you come here and rally against the ills of CRT. What dog do you have in this fight? I've seen Black people do it. He's like, the CRT. What CRT? What specifically are you against? Because that doesn't exist. It's a fucking boogeyman. It's a high
level like Ivy League legal theory, is it not? Like you're right. You're right. People on Twitter, you can guarantee no one's read that shit. They've just heard it from somebody that they follow on TV or social media,
on
and then
Twitter or Fox News, or whatever.
Of course.
And then start parroting that at the school board meetings. Why are you teaching this to my kids? Nobody's teaching anything like that to your kids. Matter of fact, Black history is underrepresented, and now you have a reason to rally against it even more, as well as a reason to get your kids to some shitty ass unregulated charter school while diverting state funds to it, which is the ultimate goal. I want it's basically segregation. 20th century segregation. It's I want my kids to go to some Christian charter school, private school that's funded by the state, while the public schools are underfunded and can't and don't have the ability to disallow kids. So you go to charter school and they could be like, nah, you don't fit. Take your ass to public school. So some underfunded public school now has to deal with some kid that couldn't get into any of these other charter schools or private schools, or they didn't fit. Is it based on race? Are you stupid? Like, who knows?
it's like putting a veil of sort of like red tape and legal mumbo jumbo and shit to say like, oh, that's not racially segregated. It's a lot of stories I hear about any in any issue in America, that it always disproportionately affects people of color far worse than it affects white people. And then when you approach that, they go, it's not racism, it's because of this, 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 and this. And you can put as many pillars between A and B, but if they still always connect, then it's the debate of the last few years that's sort of become mainstream of what they call systematic racism.
So racism is so nuts in America that even things that don't seem like they were racist are like amazingly racist. The United States highway system disproportionately went through Black neighborhoods, cut Black neighborhoods in half.
Speaking of Tulsa, right? Speaking of Greenwood, Tulsa and Greenwood is got a highway right through it now. Yeah, exactly.
Right through it now. That's the prime example. Housing in America, GI Bill. The GI Bill probably, because the GI Bill credits itself with creating the middle class of the United States. So it's probably the single worst thing that happened to Black people, like since slavery. The idea that all of these GIs, because the GI Bill required you to have a third party bank back that loan. And because the banks were not going to back loans by African Americans, they disproportionately weren't getting those loans. And now you have a person who bought a house in 1958 for $20,000, and now that house is worth $300,000. That wealth transfer, that ability to pass that kind of wealth down to your kids, that never happened for African Americans. That's a completely different ball game if that happens.
My dad was a big student of history, and he used to say to me all the time, he's like, oh, the GI Bill. He's like, you should know about the GI Bill. He's like, that's one of the biggest economic sort of roadblocks that was put up, because it excluded African Americans from being a part of the burgeoning middle class, that the foundation of wealth in America and all that there would be hundreds of thousands of families that would have grown into having property value, which is in turn, you know, all the things that people build an economic life off of. But thinking back, I'm curious what your experience was growing up, because I know for me, it's funny now in a bad way, but I remember being in elementary school in February. Like, the only memory I have of learning anything about history that wasn't about, you know, white people in those stupid powdered wigs, you know, making legislation and stuff, was Martin Luther King. Exactly what you said. It was one time in like the 4th grade in February. Yeah. They brought somebody in who, if I remember, was probably also a white woman, and she would talk about the speech. And it's that lack of context. Like, it was 20 years before I learned, you know, after Martin Luther King gives the famous one time I have a dream speech that solved racism forever, that within a year he was questioning that speech's message, that he didn't even think it was the right thing to say a little time later, that it was a sort of like a misnomer of the problem, that people were going to do what they have done with it. So, you know, for me, being a white kid in a white neighborhood and all that was my education on race. It was tough. A guy came along, he had some cool ideas, and then we all joined hands, and everything's been fine since. For you, what was your experience growing up? What if any, Black history did you learn, you know, in the formative years of your life?
Oh man, it was very, very few. I'll be honest with you. I mean, most of the history that I learned, and I grew up pretty middle class myself. The neighborhood that I grew up in, most of the kids in my neighborhood were white. The school that I went to was white. I was pretty middle class growing up, you know. They called me White Mike for a reason. There was a reason there. So my exposure to Black history was almost little to none. And it wasn't, like you said, till later that I find out that history is nuanced and layered, and it's not, you know, not only is it not a linear path, but everybody wasn't necessarily good. They was not necessarily happy. They weren't necessarily excited. Like, yeah, we achieved the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but a little bit after that, Martin Luther King stating that it cost you nothing to do that, and that the real struggle comes through, you know, economic change, you know, balancing the economic power structure. So in that, this is one of the reasons why I started the podcast, because I wanted to be more nuanced. I wanted people to understand that not only was it not a linear path, but that you can believe in multiple different things at the same time, and that Black people did, and they had beef about it. We had opposing viewpoints while going through the movement, and some people didn't believe, like, this is the wrong path, we shouldn't do this, or this is the right path, or that they were human, that you know, Martin Luther King was a whore, and that the FBI was watching Martin Luther King, watching Malcolm X, and were like, he's not king. Like, that's what they wrote about him. Malcolm X was a saint. He's like, he's not king. King's out there living his best life. But I mean, I also think it's important to remember, he was, you know, when he first got started with the Montgomery bus boycott, he was like 25. He was 25. You know, think of that. Like, I'm 41. Think where you were when you were 25. Now imagine you running a movement a movement that is going to change African Americans in this country forever. Yeah. And then imagine the amount of random ass that is going to be thrown your way. Like, it's no way, like, there's no way your head wouldn't be huge. Like, come on, man. Like, I can't even fault him other than the fact he was married. I was like, yeah, that's probably the best move. The FBI sent tapes. They sent tapes to Coretta about what he was out here doing, in hotel rooms with women. And she never, reportedly, she didn't listen to him.
Right.
But they were out here trying to sabotage his marriage.
and it's, I think even that about it, again, most of the extent of teaching any sort of Black history is Martin Luther King, the end, and it's even like you said, a flawed man, a man who had vices, a man who questioned his own suggestions at times. His
own ideas. Well, I'm doing the right thing. When he met, I talked about Bayard Rustin the other day because it was the anniversary of his death, I think. Anyway, Bayard Rustin was a gay man in the middle of the movement in a time where being openly gay, it's like, yo, even people in the movement was like, yo, why are you hanging around with this gay dude? Like, for real, this is how he felt. But he had been studying, pacifism, nonviolence, and he's the person that convinced Martin Luther King to get rid of his armed protection, to get rid of because he was carrying, during early days of the Montgomery bus boycott, he was carrying a pistol.
Yeah.
These ideas, like, Martin Luther King was not in a vacuum. These guys were not in a vacuum. They were not perfect individuals. They were flawed people with a mission. And those stories, like, how can you not be excited about that? How can that not interest you? How can you not want to hear about that? Like,
I want to know more. I want to know about Martin Luther King holding the pistol, and like, that's interesting. I'm interested in that. Like,
exactly. And this is one of the problems I have with American history as a whole, because we treat our founding fathers, our forefathers, presidents, as if they were perfect people, and they weren't. They were extremely flawed people who were doing what they were doing at a time when they felt like maybe it was the right thing, or maybe you had some preconceived notion. Like, Andrew Johnson was an asshole, so I'm pretty sure he wasn't doing what he thought was right. He's just a dick. But most of them were trying to do the right thing at the time, and you don't understand the ramifications of those things too many, many, many decades later. So we have a problem. Americans have a problem of putting people as if they are superheroes. George Washington was a superhero, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Martin Luther King, all these guys, they were human beings. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you did. And us focusing on those flaws does not make them any more heroic. It makes them what they've done, what they accomplished, more amazing, because he was just like you. Like, this could have been you. You could have been Martin Luther King if you had that vision. You had, we got issues too. And that's why I think our problem lies, or at least the problem with American history.
Our media and our culture seems to influence a lot. I take note that even in the room you're in, you're wearing a superhero t-shirt and you've got a Captain America shield on your wall. There's a huge culture of that. My brother and I were having a conversation last week about the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, and how he was really, I was saying something about how I've been watching the show of his that he used to do. It's on Netflix. My brother's going, I hate how they turned him into they were casting him for the movie. They were like, oh, Jeremy Renner should play him in the movie. And it's like, my brother had this issue with that every time a person does anything noble or honorable, they have to be turned into a movie character or a superhero, or, every middle-aged woman's new fantasy, like stuff like that. And then when we go back through history, we do the same shit to every person we look at in history. They're either fully flawed or they're canonized, essentially. And
you can't. And if you, especially with Black history, this is one of the issues that I face. When I try to tell stories of people who were nuanced and flawed, I get slacked. From people about this. When I talk about Josh Gibson and how he was an amazing, probably the greatest baseball player ever, but he's also an addict. He had a crippling heroin addiction, and was playing, even though he had stage 4 cancer, all the way up to the end, he was playing with stage 4 cancer. And I tell that story and people are like, yo, why is he this way? Why are you so negative? Or the fact that, Josh Gibson basically ran out on his own kids and never saw them again because he was constantly on the road and they were being raised by his mother. And it's like, the story is the story. It is what it is. I mean, just because you have these feelings or this, canonization of Josh Gibson or this particular person does not mean I shouldn't tell you the entire full story. And it, it jades you a little bit because you see guys who get the wrong, who are canonized and don't deserve it.
Right.
And that you want to say something. You want to be like, nah, that's not the way it is. That's not what happened. Huey P. Newton is a great example of that. Huey P. Newton is not the guy people think he was. He wasn't, he was not, I mean, yes, he came up with the idea for the Black Panthers, but he was in prison when the Black Panthers were doing the majority of their growth. The ideas, the biggest growth came from Bobby Seale. Bobby Seale was the one who was driving majority of the growth. And when Huey P. Newton was in prison, they just used Huey P. Newton as a linchpin, as a rallying cry, free Huey. And then that launched them because people saw this in the news and they're like, oh, what are these guys in Oakland doing? And then when he got out, people saw him as a god and provided him with drugs and alcohol. And now he has an alcohol addiction and he's running a major organization and we ran him into the ground. The FBI is not what killed the Black Panthers. They killed themselves because of Huey P. Newton's poor management. And now I see people that are like, hey, they put him next to Malcolm and Martin. And I'm like, that doesn't feel right.
and over the course of our conversation here, I'm starting to think a little bit as well. I mean, we talked about earlier about, white people don't like hearing about this history because it makes them feel like they were bad people. I mean, for one, for any white people, learning about history where your people who look like you did horrible things isn't an indictment on you as a person. You have only existed as long as you've existed. But do you think there's a common thread a little bit about this, that teaching regular history, people don't want to hear it because they feel like they're being told that they come from a negative lineage? And do you think in terms of Black history, it's the same problem, that to tell a story of a Black hero in history is going to get you in trouble if you tell the full human story? The more human you make these stories, historically, it seems, the more people are actually off put by reality, essentially.
I'll say this. One of the things that's always interesting to me is that people in these stories always see themselves as the bad guy in Black history stories. So you look at yourself as the asshole, as, in Plessy versus Ferguson, you're Ferguson, you're the opposer. But during this time, there were a ton of abolitionists. The NAACP was an interracial organization. It was designed as an organization, a powerful interracial organization to assist African Americans. White people were not always the bad guy in these stories. And there were a lot of white folks who were fighting for the justice and equality for African Americans. So I never understood why constantly people view themselves in these stories as if they were constantly the bad guy. Yes, they were bad players. Yes, they were assholes. Yes, they were J. Edgar Hoovers, but you don't have to always be J. Edgar Hoover in this story.
I prefer not to be, really, but
I would prefer to too. He doesn't get the animosity that he deserves. Like on the top of the list of United States assholes or people who routinely subjugate African Americans, J. Edgar Hoover is like at least 2 or 3. He 2 or 3 on that story. And the flip side of black people is that you can't humanize these guys, especially the people that canonize. Like, the older some people are, it's okay. Like, I can tell a human story of Ida B. Wells because she's so far back in history that people haven't really gravitated to her, even though she was a saint. Yeah. She was an asshole to people, but she was an absolute wonderful person. She's one of my heroes. Yeah. But like when you talk about Booker T. Washington views for African Americans at the time directly opposed to that of Du Bois. And Du Bois created a whole organization because of how much she hated Booker T. Washington and his accommodationist views. Like, can you imagine that? Someone hating you so much they created a civil rights organization. Like, man. Hey,
I think you just make a hashtag now. I think that's how you go about it.
That's what you would do. Hashtag Biden sucks. That's what's
yeah, exactly.
So, but the more recent characters, the Malcolms, the Martins, the Fred Hamptons, the Black Panthers, the Angela Davises, like, you can't tell negative stories. And even if people don't have direct commentary, those are the ones they don't want to hear. Those are the ones they don't want to listen to. No one listens to the fall of the Black Panthers. They want to hear about the rise. They don't want to hear about how they destroyed their organization themselves, or they don't want to hear about the fact that Angela Davis got famous because she most likely bought weapons for the Soledad brothers that they used to hold up a courtroom and shoot a judge and a DA. They don't want to hear about that story, that she was most likely involved. And she was acquitted because they couldn't find a direct correlation between her purchasing guns and the act they had performed. But she wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was an honorary Black Panther. She was in the movement.
Right. Right. The last area I wanted to get into here, this is the trickier stuff, I think. And you know, from my own perspective, I want it to be informative and educational in approaching this. But you mentioned, you know, when you started your podcast, that it came off the back of hearing the episodes I did on Tulsa. And one thing I know I've heard you say before is the sort of the tricky avenue of a white person telling a story like that. And it was something that I was very conscious of. No disrespect. And it's something I was very conscious of at the time was it was one of those things where halfway through I remember being like, should I even be doing this? And then I was like, I've already done like 40 hours of work. I can't stop now.
I'm in it now.
Like I couldn't back out at that point. But do you think that there's a role to be played for I guess white people to tell stories of history like that, or speak on issues in the modern day? Is there a role? Is there a value to that perspective? Is there an approach that someone like me should take, or a perspective that we should approach those topics with? How can someone like me do a better job of telling those stories or being supportive in that way?
I mean, I feel like, you know, what you're doing and just the idea of the promotion of Black history is a positive. That's a positive. That's a win. Like, yes, in this particular space, I felt like this story should be told by somebody of color. It should be told, you know, I want to say by me, but I mean, who else was it going to be? Nobody else is going running up to the plate. We want to do this.
Right.
So there's not that many of us, not a whole lot of Black guys who are clamoring to come do or share this content. So the idea that anybody in any race wants to talk about these stories, that's a win. That's a win. The more that we can tell these stories, the more that we can talk about it, the more that people are knowledgeable of it is a win. I mean, there are tons of people who lived in Greenwood their entire lives who had no idea about the Tulsa Massacre and are never going to hear my podcast. So the idea that they can find yours and listen to yours, that's a positive. It's a positive.
Yeah.
So, while I know you're conscious, like, hey, should I be doing this? Absolutely should be doing this. And there's enough. I think there's a space for both of us to be sharing in the same and similar stories. Like I don't own these stories. They're not mine. I have a connection to these people because they're of the same race, but the stories are not mine. They're not owned by me. They're not my opinions. So we all can learn and all can grow from telling similar stories. And I think it's a positive. I think it's a win.
All right. Putting me at ease, really. Look at me trying to justify myself at the end of the interview here.
Nah, man, you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good. I was in my space, in my headspace, but you weren't doing anything wrong. And matter of fact, I mean, I feel like your episode is superior. It's superior to mine. Like, mine was okay.
No.
I remember listening to yours, and I'm like, I can't duplicate this. I can't do this.
That was the most sleepless period of podcasting for me was staying up late with books and highlighters and shit and trying to figure out how do I do this correctly, you know?
It's the worst. The books is the worst. Like when you got articles usually give you like concise details and you can kind of create an amalgamation. When you start throwing books in there and you're reading through books, trying to find relevant information. Is this too much? Is it not enough? It might give you too much information. In some areas, am I giving you a novel? In other areas, I'm glossing over things like, it sucks.
It's the challenge of what we do. And it never gets easier until we can hire a team full of interns.
So I can hire a team full of interns.
Which for you might be sooner than later, I'd probably wager. But
we'll see. We will see.
Well, Michael Motley, thank you, man. It's so cool. It's awesome to finally have you on the show and actually have this conversation to talk about this stuff and your podcast. You're doing such a damn good job. You're maybe my favorite person to follow on the social media, and I'm amazed at the success you've had, and I'm certain that you got a whole lot more coming in your future.
Oh yeah, I hope so. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, man.
You got some plugs you want to do? You want to tell people where they can find you? What the resources they can get all your content?
So you can find me on Twitter at OneMic History. You can find me on Instagram at OneMic History. Yeah, OneMic History. You can find me on TikTok. I put all of my short form content on TikTok. I'm creating different content, completely separate from my podcast, exclusively for TikTok, for the 12-year-olds on TikTok. And also you can find all of my long form content on OneMicHistory.com. And if you go to OneMicHistory.com, you can find all of the socials and everything else from that one central area. So this will probably be the launch pad. Go to OneMicHistory.com and then you can find everything else.
Absolutely. I highly encourage, if anybody has not heard the show, and you're missing out, and get the education you need, because
right.
I mean, Lord knows you're not getting it from the education system like the rest of us.
Don't listen to the early episodes, man. Listen to the new.
Yeah, start with the new stuff and go backwards. I say the same thing about my stuff. Don't go back to episode 1. You're not gonna like it. That is it for this episode of Assorted Goods. A big thank you once more to Michael Motley for stopping by to chat. I had wanted to do this for a long time, so it was really cool to be able to sit down and get into all of this with him. Please check out the OneMic Black History Podcast. Subscribe to it on your podcast player of choice and on YouTube too. You won't regret it. And hey, you'll get the history lessons you've guaranteed to have never gotten in school. As for this podcast, if you're a fan of what I do here on Assorted Goods, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app and subscribe to it on Disinformed Media's YouTube channel as well, where Assorted Goods gets published. If you want to follow the show on the socials, you can follow me and Assorted Goods on Twitter and Instagram. The handle on both platforms is at disinformeddan. That's me. You can also visit the website, disinformed.ca, where you can find show notes for each episode. And if you want to email the show, you can reach me through the contact page on disinformed.ca, or just make it easy and email me at dan@disinformed.ca. The music for this episode was created and produced by my talented brother, David Felton. Thank you, brother, as always. Thank you for listening. Take care of each other out there, and I'll catch you next time here on Assorted Goods.